My stepmother is blowing through my dad's money because she has to live it up after her husband passed away. But then I run into someone who shouldn't be above ground, her late husband. Turns out he dumped her because she wanted his entire inheritance. Now I have to tell my dad before it's too late. My parents were college sweethearts and had a strong, loving marriage. When I was 8 years old, they got into a terrible car accident. I was with my grandparents when we heard the news, and we all rushed to the hospital. Waiting outside during their surgeries was deeply traumatizing, not knowing if they would survive. Sadly, my mother did not make it, but somehow my father pulled through. The guilt of surviving while she did not became a daily struggle for him. After the accident, my father had a hard time being a parent, especially while I was grieving the loss of my mother. My aunt, my father's sister, stepped in to help. She got us into therapy to deal with our issues, and my father started attending grief support groups to connect with others who had lost loved ones in accidents. In those support groups, he met a woman named Linda, who later became my stepmother. My father and Linda quickly became close friends, and eventually, she met me. Over time, their relationship deepened and they started dating. They married 3 years later, despite everyone thinking it was too soon, and have been together ever since. From the start, my aunt had reservations about Linda and expressed her concerns, but my father was convinced that Linda was good for him, and their connection was undeniable. Before marrying, my father told Linda that he would be the sole parent responsible for me and handle any discipline. He did not want her to step into the role of my mother, but rather to be a responsible and dependable adult figure in my life. Fortunately, she has mostly respected those boundaries and has not interfered much in my life. Fast forward to meeting my father, and now she is living a comfortable and luxurious life. Linda has a thing for splurging on pricey purses and shoes, regardless of the occasion. She loves being the center of attention. Over the years, Linda and I have kept things friendly. At first, she tried to play the "let's be friends" card, but I quickly put a stop to that. I respect her as my father's wife, but our connection pretty much ends there. Although I wasn't suspicious, I always kept my distance. Now, on to what happened. I just finished college and got a job with a cool tech company. The only catch is it's on the other side of the country. My father wanted me to join his company, but I really wanted to carve my own path in the tech world, starting from scratch and learning on my own. Before I left, Linda threw a small get-together with close family and friends. It was heartwarming, but everyone seemed sad about me moving so far away. On the morning of my flight, as I moved across the country and settled into a new city, I was both excited and nervous to live on my own for the first time and start a new chapter of my life. On my first day at the office, I was introduced to everyone. It's a huge place, mostly filled with engineers and coders. Given the nature of our work, we spend a lot of time in the office, often working late into the night. About a week ago, during lunch in the office cafeteria, I noticed a man who looked familiar. He was talking to my boss as they had lunch. The man seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. I was sure I had seen him somewhere and thought maybe he was from my hometown. As I was lost in thought, my coworker came up to me and asked me to get ready for a presentation for a new client. So I quickly wrapped up my lunch and left. As I entered the conference room, I noticed that familiar face sitting beside my boss. Our boss introduced him as a potential client we had to present to. Everything felt a bit hazy, and I couldn't quite catch his name as I was still trying to figure out where I knew him from. I quickly set up the projector and started the presentation. Throughout the meeting, a nagging feeling persisted, like I had seen him somewhere before. After the presentation, the man seemed impressed, and it looked like he was ready to get on board with us. I beamed, leaving my boss and him to dive into further discussions. Once their discussion was done, I saw the man heading for the elevators. I couldn't shake off the feeling, so I followed him and we ended up in the same elevator. He noticed me and smiled politely. I didn't want to seem like a stalker, so I casually mentioned how he looked familiar to me. He looked at me inquisitively, and I asked him if he was from my hometown, but he shook his head. He asked my name and told me that he had never known anyone by my last name. I realized there was no connection, so I let it be. I awkwardly shook his hand again and thanked him for choosing our company for his project. His name was Mark, and the application we were supposed to design was going to revolutionize recyclable waste management. When I heard his name, my stomach dropped. It suddenly clicked why he looked so familiar to me. I had seen his photo in one of my stepmother's albums. I vividly recall the day when my stepmother and father were out, and like any curious child, I found myself rummaging through everyone's stuff in our house. I found a photo album tucked deep into a drawer and realized from the photos that it belonged to my stepmother. I was casually flipping through the pages, idly looking at her pictures, when I stumbled upon a picture of Linda standing with a man. They looked at the camera, smiling, dressed in winter clothes, standing in front of a Christmas tree. The festive backdrop added a touch of warmth to the scene. I never directly asked Linda about the man in the photo, but I had pretty much figured it might be someone from her past. Back then, it was just a peek into Linda's past, nothing significant. Little did I know this seemingly innocent image would soon collide with my present, sparking a flurry of questions and revelations about the man I encountered at work. Later, during our team meetings, my boss informed us that this new client we had onboarded was a self-made technology guy who needed our help to polish up his application. My thoughts raced, drawing connections between the client I knew and Linda's supposedly late ex-husband from her history. I was confused as to how Mark was still alive when Linda told us that he had passed away years ago. I felt lost, unsure of what to do, and talking to Linda about it seemed out of the question. If she'd been lying about her ex-husband all this time, there was no way she would suddenly come clean. I needed solid proof before confronting her, confirming that the man who is our client currently is indeed the same person, Mark. Since the revelation, I have been sticking close to my boss during meetings with Mark, hoping for a chance to talk to him privately and dig deeper for the truth. Today, with my boss on medical leave, it felt like the perfect opportunity to talk with Mark. We finished our meeting, and I asked Mark if he wanted to have lunch with me at our office cafeteria. He agreed, and we went down for lunch. We talked about our work, and our conversations slowly drifted to family. I shared with him that my mother had passed away when I was young. Mark looked sympathetic, his expression reflecting a mix of understanding and compassion. I then eased into the conversation, mentioning that my father was married to a woman named Linda. Mark's reaction was noticeable. He went really quiet and looked up at me like he was trying to process what I just said. The revelation seemed to hit him like a sudden gust of wind, catching him off guard. His brows furrowed slightly, and he took a moment to process the unexpected news. Looking at his reaction, I asked him if he knew her, and he slowly nodded. He asked me to show him a picture of her, and when I did, he gasped in surprise. I started talking about Linda's version of his past, the fire, financial struggles, and his apparent demise. The initial furrowed brows deepened into a more pronounced look of disbelief. I could see the gears turning in his mind as he struggled to process the narrative I was laying out. Mark shared his story about being married to a woman named Sarah. They enjoyed 2 beautiful years together before Sarah tragically died in a skiing accident during a vacation. The loss plunged Mark into deep despair. On a friend's advice, he joined a grief counseling group to cope with the pain. In this group, Mark met Linda, who had lost her husband in a shooting. The support group provided comfort, showing Mark that others were also dealing with the heavy grief of losing their spouses. Over time, Mark and Linda became friends, finding solace in each other's company. A year later, Mark married Linda, hoping for a second chance at happiness. Things went well at first, but trouble started when they discussed his will. Mark revealed that his house would go to his brother's children if he died. Linda was upset, questioning why he hadn't left the house to her. Mark explained that it was a family home, and he wanted to keep it in the family, assuring her that she would be financially secure with his savings. When she asked about his life insurance, Mark said he had named his brother as the beneficiary. This led to a huge fight, with Linda insisting she deserved the house and the money. After that, their relationship deteriorated. Linda began picking fights over small issues and accusing Mark of infidelity without proof. The conflicts escalated until they both found it unbearable. They eventually decided to divorce, realizing their relationship wasn't working. During the divorce proceedings, Linda shocked Mark by accusing him of financially abusing her to control her. Being younger, Linda made her story seem believable, damaging Mark's reputation. Her false accusations affected his relationships with friends and family. Following his lawyer's advice, Mark agreed to pay substantial alimony to Linda to prevent her from further tarnishing his character. Since then, Linda had disappeared from his life, and today was the first time Mark had any news of her. Listening to his story left me in shock. Mark's revelations painted a dark picture of Linda's actions, showing a calculated scheme of deceit and manipulation. After our lunch together, I assured Mark that I would uncover the truth about Linda's deceit. I spent the whole day thinking about the details and trying to figure out my next steps. Even now, as I write this, I still can't shake off the disbelief and anger simmering within me. It's shocking to realize how seamlessly she has woven herself into our lives, all to benefit financially from my father. Sadly, my father had fallen for her convincing tales. On one hand, I feel conflicted because my father seems genuinely happy with Linda, and I'm unsure how to break the news to him as it could hurt him. On the other hand, I know that Linda joins grief support groups to find vulnerable people she can target and manipulate. The fact that she lied about her husband's death in a building fire to gain our sympathy and trust adds another layer to her deceit. I feel conflicted about how to proceed. Will I be a bad person if I tell my father the truth and confront Linda about her past? Taking everyone's advice, I chose to confide in my aunt about the situation. I needed another adult to believe my story before confronting my dad. Not wanting to take leave from work as I have just joined the company, I invited my Aunt Hilda to visit me here. She flew in last night and was overjoyed to see me. I had planned to take her out for breakfast, and I had invited Mark too. I wanted her to hear the whole story from Mark. I was shaking in anticipation as I drove her to the cafe. When we entered the cafe, Mark was already there waiting for us. I walked up to him with my aunt behind me, who gave me a curious look. I told her we needed to discuss something with her, and concern flashed across her face. After placing our orders, I turned to my aunt, revealing that this was Mark, Linda's ex-husband. Mark politely smiled, and my aunt looked at him in disbelief. I asked Hilda if she had ever seen Linda's ex-husband in pictures, and she shook her head. I told her that I had when I went through Linda's photo album. Although my aunt did not know what Mark looked like, she knew that Mark was supposed to be dead, so she looked at him in shock. Mark then showed her pictures of him and Linda on their wedding day, honeymoon, and other events. He explained how Linda had deceived him into marriage, and eventually, when she discovered he was unwilling to give her any of his properties or life insurance, they ended up in a bitter fight, leading to their divorce. Mark revealed how Linda had almost ruined his life by spreading lies to his friends and family. She only agreed to vanish from his life after he paid a substantial amount of money as alimony. My aunt was in total shock the entire time. I then explained to her how Linda purposefully joined grief support groups, seeking out vulnerable individuals to exploit, especially wealthy widows. She befriends them and marries them in the hopes of securing a hefty inheritance. Hilda, still in disbelief, bombarded Mark with questions, digging for more details about Linda. Each answer seemed to deepen her shock. As Mark continued revealing Linda's deceitful actions, my aunt's disbelief transformed into a mix of concern and outrage. Hilda looked at me and emphasized that we needed to talk to my dad about this as soon as possible. She stressed the importance of revealing the truth to him before the situation spiraled further out of control. She was afraid that Linda might put my dad through the same fate as Mark. Mark agreed with her and warned us that Linda was capable of doing this when it came to matters of money. As our conversation unfolded, it became clear that Linda had meticulously crafted a fake tragedy, falsely claiming Mark's death in a non-existent fire. This sinister plot allowed her to integrate into yet another grief counseling group, potentially targeting her next victim. The scheme aimed to garner sympathy, portraying her as a grieving widow burdened by a tragedy she had invented. I nodded solemnly, finding solace in the fact that my aunt now knew the truth, and we could together reveal the truth about Linda. Mark and Hilda exchanged numbers so Mark could send her his pictures with Linda. With these photos in hand, my aunt and I felt a sense of empowerment as we now had proof to show my dad and the rest of our family. As we left the cafe, there was an unspoken understanding between Mark, my aunt, and me. A shared determination to untangle the deceit woven by Linda and protect others from further harm. Since returning home, my aunt and I have been trying to figure out how and when to break this news to my dad. We do not want to confront him in front of Linda as we do not trust her anymore. It remains to be seen what we do next. I was determined to be with my dad when we revealed the truth to him. I did not want to talk about this on the phone. Taking a break from work during Thanksgiving, I flew back home for our yearly family gathering. Upon my arrival, our home was decorated festively, and Linda welcomed me in. This was my first encounter with her since learning about her past. I awkwardly smiled at her and hurried to greet my dad. It had been a while since I saw him, and I realized just how much I missed him. The family gathered for Thanksgiving dinner, and we all had a wonderful time together. Hilda and I kept exchanging glances, uncertain about finding the right moment to talk to my dad privately. The next morning, I took my dad out for lunch under the pretext of discussing my ongoing projects. Knowing Linda's disinterest in work-related discussions, I was confident she would not join us. My dad seemed surprised when Hilda joined us for lunch, thinking I had invited him alone. Without wasting much time, Hilda asked him if he had ever investigated Linda's past. My dad stared at her blankly and said he had never done that. I then showed my dad pictures of Mark and Linda, asking if he recognized the man. He nodded, saying it was Mark, Linda's ex-husband who had passed away. I went on to tell him that Mark was indeed alive and that I had met him at work. My dad looked at me surprised as I explained that Mark was never dead. Linda had divorced him after finding out he was not going to transfer any of his properties to her after his death. During their divorce, she had tried her best to ruin his reputation among his family and friends. My dad leaned back, processing the unexpected revelation. After a moment of silence, he looked at me and said, "How did you find out about all this, and why didn't Linda tell me the truth?" I took a deep breath, explaining my unexpected encounter with Mark at work. I told him how Mark came into my workplace one day as a potential client, which eventually led me to confront him. Mark had no idea Linda was my stepmother, and he was as surprised as we were when I told him about the false story Linda had told us, claiming he died in a building fire. The expression on my dad's face shifted from surprise to a mix of shock and realization. He seemed torn between the truth I presented and the years he had spent believing Linda's fabricated stories. He started asking more questions about Mark and Linda's past, trying to understand the extent of the deception. My aunt Hilda interjected, explaining that Linda had manipulated Mark by meeting him at a grief support group and claiming her last husband died in a shooting accident. She had then married him to financially exploit him during their marriage. Hilda emphasized that my dad needed to recognize the severity of Linda's actions and think about the next course of action. As the weight of the situation settled in, my dad looked confused and betrayed. I felt bad for breaking my dad's heart. He admitted that he felt blindsided by Linda's deceit and was struggling to accept our version of the truth when he was told something entirely different by Linda. As our last resort, we decided to FaceTime Mark so he could directly talk with my dad and help sort out any further confusion. Initially hesitant, my dad eventually agreed. Mark and my dad engaged in a lengthy, detailed discussion about Linda. As the conversation unfolded, my dad was compelled to confront the reality that Linda had been deceiving us for all these years. The weight of the truth finally settled on him, and it was evident that this revelation had shattered the image he held of Linda. He was white as a sheet and was struggling to comprehend the extent of Linda's lies. Amid the revelation, my Aunt Hilda did her best to comfort him, understanding his profound shock at discovering the truth. I asked my dad to take his time and come up with a plan for what he wanted to do next. I assured him that both my aunt and I were there to support him through whatever decisions he needed to make in the aftermath of this shocking revelation. The gravity of Linda's deception weighs heavily on us all, and the path forward remains uncertain, but my dad's well-being remains my top priority. I will make sure to stand by Dad and support him in any way I can, and hopefully Linda does not get to continue manipulating and hurting our family. Together, we will navigate this challenging situation and ensure that my dad finds the clarity and resolution he needs for the next chapter of his life. It has been 2 months since my last update, and a lot has happened since then. First, after the truth came out, my dad confronted Linda, leading to a heated argument. Despite her lies, my dad showed evidence, including pictures of their marriage. He told her that Mark had met me at work and told me everything about their marriage. Cornered, Linda finally admitted to her lies and revealed the extent of her schemes. My dad then asked her to leave our house immediately, which surprised me. It was the first time I'd seen him raise his voice. Linda, visibly shaken, shot an angry glance at me, seemingly blaming me for exposing her past. I felt no sympathy for her. I owed her nothing. Taking a firm stance, my dad decided to file for divorce and started discussions with his attorney. At first, when he parted ways with Linda, my dad was not the same. He was sad and shattered. Luckily, we are a close-knit family, and everyone rallied around him, offering support during this tough period. The revelation about Linda's deceit left everyone as stunned as we were. Despite Linda's attempts to reach my dad, he blocked her on all fronts. I was sure she would not dare to message me, given that I exposed her truth. Today, I see my dad going through a tough time, but I'm also glad he is separated from that awful woman. I genuinely hope he finds healing and moves on to better days after this tough chapter. Amidst all this, my bond with my dad has grown stronger. We share our thoughts and feelings more openly now, helping each other navigate the emotional aftermath of Linda's deception. It is clear that the healing process is slowly happening and it will take some time, but eventually, we will move past this obstacle together, leaving the shadows of the past behind.